Welcome back, everyone, as we talk today about our final type of subordinate clause, the noun clause. We've taken a look at both independent and subordinate clauses as general types. And then in the subordinate clause category, we've drilled down further to look at adjective clauses, adverb clauses, and today, finally, noun clauses. So, as we get going on this, let's take a look at what a noun clause is. First of all, a noun clause, as the name would imply, functions as a noun in a sentence. It may or may not begin with a subordinator. If it does, that subordinator will usually appear as a coordinating conjunction, just like we would use in an adverb clause. How do they work? Well, I think the easiest way to see how they work is to put one together ourselves, substituting a noun clause in for a simple noun in an existing sentence. So what's our existing sentence? Here's our sample sentence. You really don't want to know the ingredients in Aunt Nancy's stew. Have any relatives that cook like that? Hope not. But we can substitute another word for the noun ingredients, right? Ingredients is a noun, but what could be another way to talk about ingredients? You could describe it with a clause, couldn't you? Couldn't you call it what Aunt Nancy adds to her stew? See how we've replaced the noun ingredients with a clause, what Aunt Nancy adds to her stew? We're going to stick that in place of ingredients, and voila, we get the following sentence. You really don't want to know what Aunt Nancy adds to her stew. Same meaning, but we've just taken out the simple noun ingredients and the prepositional phrase that modified it in Aunt Nancy's stew and replaced all of that with a noun clause. What Aunt Nancy adds to her stew. Notice it did start in this case with a subordinator that looks a lot like a subordinating conjunction. What she adds to her stew. All right, there's the general concept. Let's take a look at some examples here together. Ready? Some simple examples first. Number one, whatever he says is always true. Wish that was true of everybody, don't you? Here we can look for a couple of things. We can approach it in a couple ways. One way is to look for a subordinator. Let's do that. Do we see a subordinator? How about this one? Whatever. Yep, we got it. So the subordinator here is whatever. We can also look for the differing sets of subjects and verbs. Remember, every clause, independent or subordinate, has to have a subject and a verb as a minimum. So let's move along and look at that, shall we? Verbs first, I think that's easier. Here's a verb, says, right? So we'll call that verb 1. Is, there we go, verb 2. What's the subject of verb 1? Who says? He says, right? So we'll call that S1. Gee, this pen is not working too well. S1. Maybe I'll trade and use red from now on. There's S1, subject 1, that goes with verb 1. Well, what's the subject of verb 2? Is. Well, don't really see one. Until we back up and see that it is always true, we substitute in a pronoun like it. And by the way, that's a big tip. And if you are looking at the worksheet, I actually mentioned that before hitting this example. I used a live example here first to bring it up, but if you can substitute it or they, them, if it's a plural object, and it will depend on whether it's subject or object case as to whether it's they or them, or sometimes he, him, if we're talking about a person. But if you can substitute a pronoun, which is a type of noun, for your clause, it clearly is a noun clause, because those pronouns always serve in the place of nouns. So it is always true. Wouldn't that complete that sentence? So what's the it? The it is whatever he says. So we can see here that whatever he says is our noun clause, and it serves, in this case, as the subject of the verb is. So it is a subject, in this case, our noun clause. Sentence number 2. I like what you've written. All right? Let's do the same process. I'm not going to write them, just going to circle them now. What looks like a subordinator, doesn't it? Let's see if it fits with where the subjects and verbs are and confirms that. First verb is like. And again, I'm running out of gas in this pen. See if I can make it work. Verb 1. Where's verb 2? It's have written, isn't it? We have a contraction. You've is you have. So what we've really got is a verb phrase here, have written. That's verb 2. What's the subject of verb 1? S1 is I. What's the subject of have written? Well, you have written. So there we have our two clauses. And the break point is at the subordinator. So I like it. And what's the it? What you've written. Again, substituting a pronoun like it makes it really handy to spot because that's obviously a noun. Therefore, this whole thing is also obviously a noun. Now, what part of speech is it? It's not the subject. I is the subject of this whole sentence. I like something. What do I like? I like it. And what's the it? The it is what you've written. So I like what? I like it. We use that what following the verb to help us identify what? A direct object, right? I see what? I see you. You're the direct object of see. I like what? I like what you've written. That then is the direct object. So what we've got here is a direct object being formed by the noun phrase, what you've written. Very good. Let's look at example 3, shall we? This gift is what you wanted. All right, again, we can see what looks like a subordinator there. We can take a closer look at that a little bit. And again, I think I will permanently switch to red here. All right, let's look for our verbs. Verb 1 is. Verb 2, wanted. What's the subject of verb 2, working backwards? You. You want it. What's the subject of is? Gift, right? So gift is and you want it are our two clauses. We would break at the subordinator. This gift is. Is that an independent clause? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't say much. It's just saying that it exists. We then show here it exists in what fashion. What is it? Is what kind of a verb? It's a linking verb, right? That means it links it either to something in the predicate that is another name for it, or something in the predicate that further describes it. In this case, what we have here is another name for the gift. This gift is what you wanted. We could say something like, this gift is a car. Another name for the gift, right? Well, a whole other name for the gift is what you wanted. Isn't the gift equal to what you wanted? Sure it is. So that makes it a predicate nominative, correct? So there's our whole noun clause, what you wanted. Linking verb is means the subject, this gift, is renamed in the predicate as what you wanted. So it's a predicate nominative. Example number 4. I agree with what he said. All right, let's take a look. Do we see a subordinator? Could be. What he said sure looks like a subordinator in front of a clause because he said is a clause, right? That's subject to verb 2. I know 2 because there's got to be something ahead of it, right? What subject 1 and verb 1? I agree, right? Subject 1, verb 1. So I agree with what he said. Now, what part of speech do we have here? It's not the subject. I is the subject of this big thing. I agree. I agree what? There's no object of it, but there is a preposition, isn't there? You see the preposition with? Now with what? With it. I agree with it. Well, what's it? It has been replaced by a noun clause. What he said. So there we have it. I agree with what he said. It, in this case, is a object of a preposition. So there we have our basic examples. Quickly before we go, talk about some hints, notes, and some unusual sentences. Big tip we've used all along here so far today is substitute it or they, them, occasionally he, him, she, her, for the clause to test to see if it's truly a noun clause. If it can be replaced by that, it indeed is a noun clause. Second point, and I'll show that in the examples here, sometimes the subordinator is unstated. It appears not to be there, but in truth it's actually there but not stated. Let's take a look. I hope it's not too late. Well, subject 1, I hope, verb 1, it is. Isn't that subject 1, verb 2? It and is. Well, where's the subordinator? The subordinator is not stated, but it's in the middle. That. I hope that it's not too late. So note that. It can separate the two of them. I hope what? I hope that it's not too late. Again, this is a direct object, right? It's what we hope. Second example. I could tell it was you. I, subject 1, could tell, that verb phrase is verb 2. It is subject, verb 1, excuse me. It is subject 1. Was is verb two, subject two, verb two. I'm having a hard time keeping my ones and twos straight. Let's review that. Subject one is I, could tell is verb one. Subject two is it, verb two is was you. All right, well, where's our subordinator? Isn't it really here between the two clauses but unstated? I could tell that it was you. So that's something to look for and to be aware of. And again, in this case, I could tell what? I could tell it. I could tell that it was you. Again, a direct object. And that's most frequently where you'll see the subordinator dropped. Okay, so we've seen noun clauses and how they operate. Remember the tips. And we've wrapped up with this, our coverage of all types of subordinate clauses, adjective, adverb, and noun. Hope that helps.